Okay, everyone, we are back for another discussion of archetypes. This is part of our series. This is part 7, in fact, of the series that I have been so fortunate to be doing with my good friend, Dr. A.P. Canavan. Hello, A.P. How are you?
Hello, Philip. It is good to be back. And this is our last one on the sort of the Jungian archetypes.
Correct.
So it's going to be a bit sad, but we'll move on to other archetypes, other tropes, things like that. But we're ending on the big one.
Yeah, the big one, the hero. And the hero's shadow archetype is, of course, the villain. And we're also going to be talking about the last archetype, the everyman, whose shadow archetype is the follower. So we will begin with the hero and its shadow, the villain, and then
No,
we'll
no,
move
no, no, no,
on.
no, no.
Oh,
We'll leave that to the end. That's the big finale. We,
okay,
we,
we'll have to do that.
we have to
So
we have to go with follower and everyman first
okay,
because
we shall do that. The follower will be followed by the hero and the villain, as in Dr. Fantasy and Professor Fireballs. Who's got the cape? Who's got the cape?
one of these days, that cape is going to get you killed. It's going to get caught on something. You're going to get yanked by the neck. Your head's going to fall off.
Yeah, well, for now, it just, the hero has the cape. So that's how it goes. So anyway, all right, fine. We'll do the everyman slash the follower first, and then we'll do the hero and the villain. So there are some interesting things to say about this. The coin that separates, we've been calling it the coin. People who've been watching the series know what I mean, because there is a quality that both the archetype, the good archetype, and its shadow archetype share. So the quality that is shared between the everyman slash follower is belonging. And so just to kind of explain this a little bit first, I think might be helpful to the viewers. What do we mean by belonging, AP?
Right. Well, if you recall, when we did caregiver and slave, the sort of the defining quality about it was about service, and what we have here with everyman and follower, at least I feel, is similar to that, but it's a slight variant on it because it's about that trope, that thing that we love in a lot of our stories of the found family.
Yeah.
When we think of the quest group and the camaraderie and this sense of belonging that evolves over the narrative that we get to partake in. And the everyman quite often is a character that is our view of the world itself.
Right.
Because let's think the hero, the mage, all of these other characters that we typically have in the groups are the ones with the special powers. They are different. And the everyman is our glimpse of what the actual world that they live in
Yeah.
is meant to be like.
Yeah.
And they are quite often an emotional core to the group.
Yeah.
They reflect the core values of the world, of community. And in that, they ground the narrative. So while adventures can spiral out where it's against increasingly powerful bad guys and where the fate of the world or the universe or the multiverse is in jeopardy,
Yeah.
the everyman is a way of bringing it back and reconnecting it on an emotional level to the lives of everyone who live in that world. So if we think of the Avengers, everyone in the Avengers is absolutely amazing, and then you kind of think of, well, apart from Hawkeye.
Oh, poor Hawkeye. Yeah,
You know,
but he's important. He's a guy has an important emotional role because, as you say, he's the one that grounds everybody. He's the one that reminds everybody what's at stake. He's the one that is the connection back to the normal world in this world of in this story of heroes and everything else. So yeah, I think that's an important function, right?
and the sort of the flip side of that is when we have follower. And
Yeah,
I think the issue with follower is, and again, this is one of the difficulties with the literary archetypes, because quite often followers are those ones that those characters that are just sort of hanging around in there. They are identified solely by their function as part of the group.
yeah,
So, when in Star Trek, when Kirk, McCoy, and Spock beam down, and then there's the followers, the three guys in red shirts, and a couple of guys in yellow shirts and a couple of people in blue shirts. You go, all right, so there's medic number 1, security officers 2 and 3.
Yeah.
They are followers. There's nothing to their entire identity is they are just part of the group.
Yeah.
Whereas with McCoy is very much the everyman in this strange world of space exploration, because McCoy is the folksy doctor. So even though they're in space, he's the folksy doctor from the Wild West.
Yeah.
Spock is an alien, Kirk is the captain. And then you have McCoy going, oh, wise up, like be normal about this sort of thing. Or we have Scotty. Scotty quite often fulfills that role as well, that there are points of connection to the reality of living in that world. Whereas we feel that, you know, Spock and Kirk are very, very special.
Interesting. So if we go back to the moral distinction that we've often been making in the previous videos about the difference between the good archetype and the shadow archetype, what it's boiled down to in our previous discussions is an emphasis with the good archetype, where they are there to serve other people. They are there to help others. Whereas the shadow archetype tends to be more self-centered or less helpful in the world. So if we're talking about everyman versus follower, you have that function of the everyman character, it's salt of the earth, kind of, you know, the person who connects you back to what's important, right? To the world that ultimately the hero has to return to, the normal world along in the hero's journey. And it's that everyman character that reminds us of that world. And so that's an important function of the good values that are at stake here. The Shire and all that, that has to be saved. Whereas the follower, I feel like, does not perform that function. The follower is almost a sort of a mindless one who seeks to just belong to the group, to go along with, it's like Draco Malfoy's buddies, they're Crabbe and Goyle, right? I mean, they don't contribute anything useful. They're just there mindlessly following this other character. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so for the everyman, being part of the group, that aspect of belonging, they bring the real world and help ground the other characters. They're bringing that to the other characters and maintaining that connection between them and the real world while they're on their adventure. Yeah. But with Crabbe and Goyle and the idea of the follower, they have joined the group in a selfish way, that they follow around. There's the hero, we're going to follow them around because it serves us. The group gives us meaning. The everyman brings something to the group, this point of connection, but the follower is basically being defined by the group because that's all they are. They don't bring anything. They are using the group as a way of creating an identity.
Brilliant. So let's get some examples then of the everyman from our favorite series, the Malazan Book of the Fall and the Malazan world in general. There are some great examples. Often it's the Malazan soldiers, the grunts, the Marines, the ones that, for me, perform this very important function of reminding me of what's at stake, giving me that very human level of the story amidst these bigger powers that are all around. So, I mean, we all have our favorites, but I think a couple pairs that you and I have talked about would be Picker and Blend would be a great example. You have Fiddler and Hedge. These are soldiers who are doing their best. They are very much salt of the earth, characters who ground us, who give us the moral compass often, but also just let the reader feel like we're in the midst of this because we're seeing things through these characters' perspectives amongst these much larger powers that are all around. So I think those are pretty good examples, right?
Yeah, and if you think like from Gardens of the Moon, because we won't talk about any of the later books, but Talk the Younger,
yes.
in that dinner sequence where you have Ujek the general, you have Adjunct Lorne, the right hand of the Empress, you have Taishrin, the High Mage, you have Tattersail, the head of the mage cadre of the Second Army, and then you have Talk. And Talk's kind of just sitting there way out of his league. Yeah. But it gives that sense of when these powerful or extraordinary individuals are around, here's someone who is relatively, well, we say relatively normal, per Talk. But
poor Talk. Yeah.
but talk is our point of connection there, and we
Yeah.
see particularly in that dinner sequence how important that emotional connection of remembering what is important about being human is.
Yes.
It's not about the power plays, it's not about the state of the empire, it's about what is important to being yourself.
Yeah.
And that's what talk brings to that scene in particular. So
Yeah.
like talk is a good example of this, I
I
think.
agree. Yeah. And he's so self-effacing. And speaking of that kind of quality, I think we mentioned Harry Potter before. How about Ron Weasley? He's a great everyman character, isn't he? And
And that's I think that both Ron and Hermione in some ways represent elements of the everyman. Like Ron is, I think we all knew a Ron at school. Like his heart's in the right place.
yeah.
His head's up his ass, but his heart's in the right place.
Yeah. And he's loyal and what else?
But I think one of the things that Rowling does well is there are times when Ron or who's the one that should have been in Hufflepuff
Besides
uh,
Ron?
besides Ron, the other one who
Oh, Nevin Longbottom.
yeah,
Yeah.
Neville Longbottom.
Neville. Yes. Sorry. Yeah.
They're both very much that everyman kind of character.
Yeah.
Why and they stand up to the heroes, they stand up to the important characters at certain points in the narrative,
Yeah.
and it shows that strength of the everyman. Hermione, while I think sometimes she does that, she performs that function, Hermione for me should have been the hero of Harry Potter.
Same here. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
she's frequently singled out as like the one of the most gifted witches of her generation.
Yeah.
So because she gets singled out, even though she is part of that group, it is about that found family, it is about that close-knit group, and she represents the reader in a lot of ways, coming from, she has normal parents and is that sort of entry point of understanding the real world.
Yeah.
And Harry having the odd things about him, which obviously we'll talk about in terms of the hero,
Yeah.
and then Ron being fully part of the magical world. Hermione, in a lot of respects, fills in as the everyman for us because she gives us that perspective of, no, you do realize that this is weird.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's a great character who does that in a different series. In the Dresden Files, you have Karen Murphy, who performs exactly that function in respect to Harry Dresden. She is the ordinary person. She's the police officer who works with Harry Dresden, but she represents the normal mortal view of magic and that world, which is basically, so she's a very grounded character as well. So talk about salt of the earth. I mean, she's a great character.
Yeah, and she doesn't suffer fools gladly. She adds that element of a grounding to the universe, to a fantastic narrative. And characters like Karen, and I know obviously Karen as a character gets developed more and more and more as the series goes on. We're not discussing that.
Right.
But Karen initially is very much, I'm not putting up with your shit, Harry.
Right.
That's and she kind of likes Harry, but when he does something slightly odd, she calls him on it. So it's a way of adding an element of authenticity and verisimilitude to the narrative to make it appear more real and feel more authentic.
Yeah. And she's no mere sidekick at all. She has her very own, I think, strong character. But sometimes these everyman characters can be like sidekicks. For example, in the Stormlight Archive, you have Kaladin, who is clearly in the mold of a hero, but he has all these dudes around him in Bridge 4, the Bridge 4 crew, and they all have their personalities, but they're clearly, many of them serve this function, right, of the everyman.
And that's it. And again, when we talk about these in terms of the archetypes, one of the points that we keep making is we are not saying that they are just the archetype. The archetype is sometimes a way of identifying a function that they fulfill within the narrative.
Right.
And characters, by definition, when they are expanded upon, grow beyond the bounds of a single element.
Yes.
But with Bridge 4, we can see like elements of this. A lot of Bridge 4 are there as supporting characters to Kaladin. Their function and role is to support him, to provide him with a family, to help him learn lessons. The focus of the narrative is Kaladin, And then we have the rest of Bridge 4 are pretty much there to serve Kaladin's narrative arc, not their own. So I think there's actually movement between some of them into the follower camp, particularly the ones that if you tried to list all of them and you're not like a massive Stormlight Archive fan, you go, oh, there was that. I can remember 3.
Yeah.
And the other ones kind of, while they are distinct in the narrative when you're reading them, they kind of fade away because their importance is not really as characters in their own right. Their importance is supporting Kaladin's arc.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that. But then there are sometimes the everyman type characters who begin in that supporting role, but end up with their own arc. For example, Perrin in Wheel of Time. I think is a good one, a good example of that, of the latter sort of thing, where he certainly is the everyman that grounds the group, that Rand is the sort of, he's the main hero, but Perrin is very much the shepherd / farmer type who is has a very dedicated personality toward the rural area where they come from, and he kind of just has that feel about him of being solid and being dependable and that sort of thing, the grounding person, right? But then he has his own arc.
Yeah, and the same I think you could say about Nynaeve, because oh no, hang on, is it Nynaeve or Egwene?
It's Nynaeve who pulls the braid, and she's the
well, and okay, so this is an interesting distinction.
She's the wisdom. Nynaeve is the wisdom.
So Nynaeve is wisdom. You know, initially we have the group form, and it's clear that Moraine is the leader.
Yeah.
Lan is going to be the hero, or at least the warrior, the protector. Rand is clearly in book 1. He is the hero. He is the protagonist.
Yeah.
Where Moraine is the leader of the group and the guide and the wise mentor, sage, wizard type.
Yeah.
Nynaeve is an everyman character in some respects, because she is about, don't be so silly, like wise up, the common sense solutions. She has that attitude, but it is clear that she has special qualities, and soon completely leaves the everyman behind as her own narrative arc develops.
Right.
Egwene, on the other hand, is even more rooted in that everyman status, because initially she is not presented as special. She kind of just gets swept up in this. She is just part of the group. She is a secondary character. But again, as the Wheel of Time develops, she develops her own arc, and it's a very important arc. Mat, we don't really think of as an everyman character here, because he's too much the rogue. He's too much that sort of outlaw, roguish figure who wants to pinch people's bottoms and throw dice and gamble and be the quippy sidekick.
And wear scarves. Yeah.
But we can see how initially Egwene doesn't seem special. She's very much almost like a mirror to Perrin.
Yeah.
Nynaeve and Mat have things that really set them apart initially, and they develop their arcs, and then we have Rand being the central protagonist. So it's interesting to see that group, it doesn't neatly fit a lot of these things, but we can see those elements in them. And it's an interesting way to tease apart that dynamic.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of Rand as the central protagonist, I think we could probably move on to the hero and the shadow archetype. It would be the villain. And I think Rand is a great example, because when we have that coin in the middle, it's mastery. And I think this is interesting because this most neatly, I think, fits with the whole Joseph Campbell thing about the hero's journey, and other people have postulated similar things. But when you think about this very Jungian hero's journey, it's the hero primarily that we're talking about, who has to go through these various stages, leaving the comfort of Emmons Field or the Shire or the whatever the womb-like atmosphere is that the hero needs to get booted out of, and then grow along this journey, making some mistakes along the way, but learning their powers and that sort of thing, becoming masters, learning mastery of some great ability, some power, which then they will use to save the day and perhaps even come back to their original home and save it as well. So this is the hero's journey, right? The classic thing. And we see Rand is a perfect example of this, I think, in Wheel of Time, right?
Yeah, because if you think, like, Rand starts out and yeah, he can shoot a bow because everyone in Emond's Field can shoot these really powerful long bows.
Yeah.
And also he can use a sword, like not particularly well, but he can use a sword. And then the inkling then about everything else that develops. But a lot of what we follow in the Wheel of Time is about him learning the mastery of the sword, learning the mastery of all of these powers, learning the mastery of himself to become a ruler, to become a commander, to become the hero. He's gone from the boy, the adolescent, gone on a quest to learn these things, to learn to control them, to grow into an adult with this power that ultimately has him facing off with what happens at the end of the Wheel of Time.
Right.
But this idea of mastery, if we think the Bildungsroman is a lot about this, coming of age narratives fit into this model, because a lot of it is about starting in a position where the central protagonist has to learn these things, has to master these powers in order to overcome the evil or the tribulation that's affecting them, or whatever the antagonist is doing. And weirdly enough, there was a children's cartoon called Thundercats.
Okay.
And there's one episode from Thundercats that I remember, and it sticks out in my mind because it infuriated me. The leader of the Thundercats is Lion-O, and he is this spoiled adolescent brat, and all of the other nobles who had basically protected his family and gotten him onto the shuttle when the Thundercat homeworld had basically blown up, not at all like Krypton. And they're led by Jaga the Ghost, who's not at all like Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Okay.
But they all have a special power. Chitara can run really, really fast because she's a cheetah. Tigra is this acrobatic tiger sort of noble assassin type.
Okay.
Panthro is the really powerful, physically powerful one.
I'm beginning to see why it's called Thundercats.
Yeah, they're all cats. Yeah. And then Wily Kit and Wily Cat, for some reason, are also basically the same age as Lion-O, but they never grew up, and who cares? But anyway, this one particular episode was all about Lion-O. In order to become their true leader, he had to beat them all at their special skill.
Oh.
So he had to win a race against Chitara. He had to defeat Tigra and whatever thing. He had to beat Panthro in a contest of strength to prove that he should lead them. Huh. And the reason it annoyed me, there's a difference between mastering and your own power and being better than someone who that is their specialism.
Yeah.
And all of these other characters were basically defined by this one amazing thing that they could do. And for some reason, this cartoon, in order for Lion-O to be true hero, had to be better than all of them at their thing. And it never made any sense. There is no way he should be able to beat Chitara in a race. Right. She can run and blur with speed. He's doing a bit of a jog. Panthro can bench press him with one arm. Tigra is this amazing acrobatic he's just cool. And then you have Lion-O, who's basically this 17-year-old idiot. And it drove me insane. But it is this idea of the hero acquiring mastery to become the true hero and then use that mastery to protect others.
Exactly. That's the distinction. So the moral distinction that we've been talking about all along is loud and clear when we talk about the hero archetype and the shadow archetype, the villain, because obviously the hero learns mastery in order to protect others, to help others, whereas the villain obviously does it for very self-centered reasons. So both are after mastery, but it's the motive that makes the distinction. And it's a loud and clear one in this case, obviously.
Yeah. He-Man, master of the universe, uses his power to protect Eternia. Skeletor wants all of the power so he can rule Eternia. Yeah. You know, and this is the easiest one to sort of, people can think of a million examples of this because it is replicated so often. And in fact, in a lot of children's and young adult fiction, it is very starkly realized because it is that nice, neat moral dichotomy. Right. more mature fiction and some of the best actually young adult fiction show the complexity of this.
Right. Right. Yeah. So you don't have to have the obvious villain character, the Sauron or the Shaitan, in there, who obviously are after mastery for their own selves. You can have a slightly more complex iteration of the villain too, I'm sure. And
Well, we all know that Sauron was annoyed because he had no body to love him.
Oh, oh dear. Oh, he just had an eye. Yeah.
He should have kept his eye on the prize.
We should have done that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But then you have, of course, lots of examples of the hero as well. You've got your Bilbo Baggins level hero, all the way up to the Kaladin, more epic kind of heroes. And we mentioned Rand already. There's Myra you mentioned as a candidate. That sounds like a one.
Yeah, Mara of the Akoma in the Daughter of the Empire trilogy by Johnny Wirtz and Raymond D. Feist.
Yeah.
But again, she, like, her storyline is less about the martial aspects that we typically see in fantasy, or the magical aspects that we typically see in fantasy. It's about the political aspects and her mastery and command of the politics and the rules of her society as a way of advancing her position and protecting her family.
Yeah.
And actually, Magician by Raymond D. Feist, the first book of the previous trilogy, The Rift War, is fascinating because there are three essential plot lines. There's Pug, who is the magic hero,
right?
Tomas, the martial hero, and Arutha, the political hero.
Yeah.
And you actually see that hero's journey in each of their plot lines. Now, obviously, some are more developed than others, but you have those three separate hero narratives woven in together to create Magician.
Interesting. And then, of course, you can have authors who will subvert the hero archetype. Great example, and one I think it's safe for us to use, is Ganos Paran from not just, we'll focus on the first book. So on Gardens of the Moon. So spoilers for Gardens of the Moon. We're not going to do anything beyond that, though, in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. But so Ganos is set up in a way, isn't he? According to the archetype of the hero. You expect, as a fantasy reader, you expect this character to be like Rand, or like, or Kaladin, or whoever. I mean, this is the hero, right? Well, it's Stephen Erickson, so.
And in fact, his subversion of that expectation about the hero, because when you map it out, Ganos actually fulfills a lot of the criteria of hero.
Right.
But we see him bumbling along and making mistakes, but we have that expectation about where it's going to end. And I think that's a lot of where Erickson plays with that expectation. But we see the same thing with Crocus. And Crocus, I think, is even more interesting because he is definitely set up with a lot of these heroic characteristics, the thief. And at the end, he's going to get the girl. And of course, the girl takes one look at him and goes, "Who the hell are you?" And again, our expectations of that traditional arc of what the hero is and the hero's rewards and the hero's quest absolutely dashed in this because of what Erickson is trying to do with creating a more complex narrative than one that is following these narrative arcs too closely.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I think we could go on and on, but what we should do is probably ask our viewers. Of course, we want to hear from you guys, your examples of the everyman / follower, but also your examples of the hero. What are your favorite heroes and villains out there, or any that maybe complicate this archetype a little bit? So that would be great to hear from you guys. Anything else you want to say about any of this, AP?
No, only to say, I mean, I've had so much fun talking about these Jungian literary archetypes because as we keep focusing on, it's not about just identifying the thing. It's not about going, here's this character and, oh, they are this thing. It's then looking at how that archetype is realized in the text, or how an author starts to subvert that archetype, or the movement of that character from one archetype to another archetype. That all of these things allow us better insight into understanding the text and understanding the characters.
Yeah.
And when we identify and go, oh, it's just this one thing, quite often we're not paying attention to the subtleties
Yeah.
and the complexities that an author has woven in. So I've loved this chance to talk about these core aspects
Yeah.
because it allows us moving forward. So you go, oh, they're fulfilling that function here, and then it's immediately subverted there. We can now talk about this with
Yeah.
that type of language.
Yeah, brilliant. So we're done with the Jungian archetypes, but there are so many archetypes to talk about, and we are going to have another discussion very soon on your channel, A Critical Dragon. And I think it's a really interesting one. So one of the first ones outside of the Jungian classical archetypes that we're going to talk about is going to be about the orphan, which is, now when we talk about archetypes, not just applied to individuals, it's a pattern as well. So it's a kind of a universal figure or pattern that we recognize. And wow, orphans are a good one, I think, in fantasy. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So thank you, AP, for this one. And we'll continue this series with lots more.
Thank you very much, Philip.
All right. Take care now, and bye to everybody.